So welcome to the Learning Science Lab's GenAI interview series. Today we'll be talking with Professor Kristen Sosulski, a clinical professor in the TOPS department here at NYU Stern and the executive director of the Learning Science Lab. Hi, Kristen.
Hey, Kate. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you, and thank you for taking the time to do this interview with us. Um,
Absolutely.
First off, I'd like to ask you about the role that generative AI plays in your course. What's your policy on student generative AI use?
That's a great question, Kate. And I hear this question all the time. So I allow Gen AI use throughout my courses. But my policy is that I ask students to kind of cite their use. And so I provide them with models and examples for how to do that.
How do you ask them to cite that? Like, what does that look like in their work?
Sure. So I teach a lot of courses that deal with data, right? We work with data sets to visualize results, to do analyses, to present insights. And in those courses, whether it be a Python course or a data visualization course, students can use generative AI in a variety of ways. So if they use it to maybe help them solve a problem, I just ask them to provide the prompt that they used that maybe provided them with an insight of the solution or the solution itself.
You've been teaching a lot of courses, and I think you've been teaching even before generative AI models became super popular and in wide use by students. Has their proliferation changed your expectations for your students?
It's totally changed the expectations that I have for my students because now they have an additional resource, right? They have someone else to think with. And so I see generative AI as really a cognitive extension of our own capabilities. And I expect the same for the students.
And have they been able to take on more challenging problems using generative AI?
Absolutely. And I give them more challenging problems now. I am no longer kind of fearful or feel like I'm putting too much pressure or upping the challenge too much for my students now because the capabilities are there for them to kind of take a risk and see if they can solve problems on their own or also in collaboration with AI. And since my policy is so open that I ask students to cite it, they generally feel very comfortable using it as part of their learning practice.
So, in addition to that comfort, have you noticed any excitement on their ends or more engagement being able to use these tools?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. So, in one of the courses I teach, we use an AI agent. And what an AI agent allows us to do is provide a prompt to produce a product. And the product might be an app. And so it allows students to actually do some vibe coding to kind of sketch out some of their ideas to see how they could be realized.
That sounds really awesome. I guess in that case, it's like the AI is part of a tool that already existed, so it's so incorporated into their use.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when we think about AI, we might just be thinking about ChatGPT and that open prompt box. When I'm talking about AI usage generally in my courses, I'm talking about the AI tools that are integrated in the tools that we already use. So for example, we use Google Colab or Collaboratory for coding in Python, which has Gemini built in. In another coding class I teach, we use something called Replit, which also has an AI agents built in. When we design logos or interface design, tools like Figma and Canva have AI agents and capabilities already built in. So this extends our usage of these different tools with the additional kind of collaborative component that these AI agents give us, which is super cool. So not only are you collaborating with your teammates, but you're also collaborating with these agents to realize your ideas.
So it's almost like students can achieve more with these tools, I guess, in the scope of your classes than they could before.
Oh my gosh, absolutely, absolutely. And like I said before, Kate, I can give, more challenging assignments and tasks for the students, which is great.
So in your course, AI is permissible, and students are comfortable and excited using it, but are they still hesitant to share their use of generative AI tools?
Yeah, sometimes. sometimes. And that's really where you have to create a culture of use. Right. And so you kind of have to peel back the layers. And what I mean by that is when I like observe, maybe, a piece of student work that could or could not be influenced by AI, like I might have a conversation with that student, or also encourage students who have done the proper citing of their AI use to kind of share it with others, whether it's a little mini presentation in front of the class or in a think, pair, share type of activity. And so the idea is to socialize the acceptance and the use of AI in the classroom as an extension of our resource kit.
And do you also model that? So students are modeling their use, but do you model like appropriate AI use to your students?
Absolutely. So, since I teach coding classes, and a lot of them are at level one, right, just elementary, basic level for the first couple weeks at least. There's always like the slow way to do things, and then there's the more sophisticated way to do things. And so sometimes I'll say, well, this is how we've learned how to do it in class. If we put it into AI, this is the type of result that we would get, and we're going to learn how to code that type of result in week 4. And so I like to kind of show the differences. And so that also does something really interesting in the class where it kind of cues students like, oh, the professor can kind of tell if I provide a solution that looks like the more sophisticated week 4 solution that, that I've used AI to achieve that. And I don't need to get to that point yet. I can take my time learning the content, learning the fundamentals, and provide that level 1 solution, that week 1 or that week 2 solution.
So in your course, when making sure that students have that fundamental knowledge, do you feel like there are places where generative AI should not be incorporated when they're developing basic coding skills?
Yeah, when they're developing basic coding skills, exactly what you said, Kate. Right. So I try to, at every juncture, really make the business case for why we're learning, how to create variables or instantiate objects or to use built-in methods or to how to create our own methods, right? These are all kind of programming fundamentals. And I try to show them, give them a little preview of the future or down the road, what's kind of possible, and give them comfort that they are to solve the problems with the information given. They really don't need to look for outside resources to solve the problems that I give them. So I like to give them that assurance so they don't immediately, as a reflex, go to AI or go to Google to try to solve the problem. They take it on first themselves.
As students move from their foundational knowledge of coding and move into more complex problems and are starting to use AI as sort of their assistant, how do you ensure that they're still learning in that process when they're using AI?
I mean, it's all about how you construct the project, for example. So why don't we assume that we're talking about a project-based course where students might be using some AI to build an application or an app, right? So there's lots of phases that go, or inputs that are required in order to kind of build an app. And usually it starts with kind of figuring out what you want to do. What's the value proposition, right? What are the users getting out of your app? And we start there. And we start with just words. And we start with brainstorming and working in teams and trying to develop the idea around that value proposition. And then we go from there. And how I, kind of assess projects and assess student progress and in turn, not necessarily monitor their use of AI, but like maybe detect their use of AI in the development of any part of it, is that I split the project in phases, right? So it's not just a summative assessment, it's a formative assessment. So we do check-ins all the time. And I ask each student to present what they've done. So when we have group meetings, for example, so I'll meet with an entire group and I'll speak to each team member and I'll have each team member describe what they've done and show me what they've done. And number one, that's so important to be able to describe what your code is doing and verbalize it. And I think that is another really interesting capability that AI affords us as well. I'm going to digress for a moment, but what I mean by that is that when we have a question, if we have the ability to go ahead and articulate it to ChatGPT or to an agent, that's already a form of learning. You're already developing this kind of metacognitive monitoring, right? Of like, what don't I know? What don't I know? And then being able to articulate what you don't know, to be able to verbalize and to ask a question is actually part of the learning process. So I think there are really some advantages to kind of having, like you said, Kate, like this assistant there, right? It's like having, you know, a 24-hour TA in some ways, right? And, you know, with TAs, you're not going to take every single piece of advice they give you. And the same thing, right, with AI. It's not always providing you with the right or the best solution, but that's where those metacognitive skills are really important. That self-monitoring of like, how well am I able to achieve this goal? How well am I able to use those resources to help me achieve that goal? And you know, where are the areas where you know, I still need to grow and learn?
So, going off of those metacognitive skills, we
Yeah.
know that generative AI a lot of the times can give a good solution, but sometimes can be inaccurate or hallucinate. Do you feel
Yes.
like students are learning by evaluating that output?
I think absolutely, absolutely. They know what they want to achieve, and they also have to articulate that ahead of time. And while we allow things like pivots, right, with any kind of group projects, but we can only like pivot so much, and so I think having the idea, having the project plan laid out is, I think, a really helpful starting point, and that allows students to evaluate the output and also kind of be in charge, right? So they're in control of their vision, and they're again using these resources to help them support the vision.
Very cool. I think that, I mean, that's just awesome that they can control that vision and learn in that way and have more capabilities. I think reflecting on your teaching approach, how has your teaching approach changed with generative AI's presence, including, I guess, your focus on learning and assessing students?
Oh my gosh. I mean, so I grew up in a generation where there is technology always around, right? And of course, my students, clearly. And so I really just welcome this change, you know, and it's kind of reinvigorated my teaching. You know, teaching is my practice, it's my passion, it's my love. And if I'm able to be kind of flexible with what's happening in society, what's happening in the world, and be able to incorporate that into my own practice, right? It's elevating my teaching, but also allowing me to kind of think creatively around my teaching practice and also critically. I really see it as a new opportunity for teaching, a new opportunity for education, a new opportunity to advance business school education, right? And if we kind of think about the field of educational technology, which is very, very broad, but it really describes it as a process of creating, say, educational interventions. And so that's what I've done all my life, right? Create educational interventions. And what do I mean by that? Creating opportunities for students to learn in different ways. And so my classroom's always been kind of an experiment. Now, a very monitored and safe experiment, right? But it's really always been a place that for my students and myself, there's a little bit of play. Not everything is very well scripted. I have a clear vision and idea where I want to go, but I have enough flexibility where I can allow for change and change, hopefully towards progress in terms of what we're able to achieve as learners, what we're able to achieve as professors and educators.
Speaking of other educators, and I think inspiring other educators and faculty with AI, is there any advice that you'd like to give other Stern faculty members regarding generative AI?
Well, there are so many faculty here at Stern that are doing such amazing things with AI in their teaching practice. And I would encourage you to talk to your colleagues, especially in your department, to kind of learn what each other are doing. And I would like to have opportunities for more for us to talk and discuss and share our practices. And I think, it's really important that if you don't really use it so much yourself, it's going to be kind of hard to kind of think about how to use it in your teaching practice. And so one of the things that like Connor Grennan and a few other people like really tout and emphasize is really try and experiment. Use it for other things, maybe not teaching and learning right up front, but find ways that you see it as a cognitive extension of your own capabilities. And I think if you can think at that level, the opportunities might just kind of pop in your mind for what's possible with regard to your own teaching practice.
And any advice for faculty who want to start a conversation with their students about generative AI?
Absolutely. I think, one thing that might be really fun to do is give students a survey, write in class like one or two questions about their generative AI use, make it anonymous, share the results in aggregate form back out to the class, and then start the discussion. Because there you're starting with having some prior knowledge of what students have done or how they've used it. And then you can also ask for volunteers. You can also ask them to think about how would you maybe want to use it in this class? Do you think it would be useful? Where don't you think it would be useful? What are some of the things that didn't go so well for you when you use generative AI? What have you done in your other classes? What are your friends doing? I think that starting a conversation, like you said, Kate, I think is a really great idea.
I love that idea of a survey where it can feel safe to kind of share what they've experienced and reflect on that and share it with you so that you know how to address them. Um,
Yeah.
is there anything else in our interview that you feel like wasn't included or you'd like to expand on? Anything that we missed at all?
I mean, I've been really thinking about AI lately as part of a technique or a um, process in which I am solving a problem or I am investigating an issue or I am working through a particular, task or workflow. And I think figuring out where you see the power of AI in your own practice, whether it's your teaching practice, your research, your scholarship, even just regular old productivity, I think is really important. It's not the first place I go, but it's also not the last place I go. It can be a starting point when I need inspiration. I want to be able to start my lesson plan for tomorrow or the next day, and I'm not sure where I want to start. Maybe I want to start with an opening question, but the questions I'm coming up with aren't impressing me. And so I might put those into AI and it might inspire me. And I might not use the question it provides me. It's just another way to kind of bounce ideas and get some feedback.
I had one more question just going back,
Yeah.
like way back in the interview.
Mhm.
But are there any specific strategies that you talk to your students about for evaluating the output of generative AI?
Um, it's, I do. I do. And, I'll tell you like just like a quick story. So, I teach a course called R Programming for Data. So it's using a programming language called R. It's really made for working with data. It's used in like all of our stats courses here. And so students come in for like a day and a half intense session with me. This is part of a program I teach called Master's of Science in Business Analytics and AI. And they've already done a little work in R, right? So they've done what we call pre-work. And with that pre-work, of course, they run into problems. They run into, errors with their code. Things aren't working. And I ask them to reflect on those moments in class. And I have them do a think, pair, share. They break up into pairs and discuss with each other what they do when things go wrong. And so I give them 5 minutes and then we do a report back. And So I go around the room, I ask for volunteers, of course. I get like 10 or 15 different students responding. So one student may say, well, when things go wrong, I actually read the error messages. They're in red, and I look at those error messages, and then I try to debug my code. Okay. Another student may raise their hand and say, yeah, I do the same, but if that doesn't work, sometimes I'll take the error message and I'll put it into Google. And I'll say, oh, that's clever. And what does Google provide? And it says, well, Google takes me to something called Stack Overflow. And Stack Overflow is like a community of coders that share when they have coding problems, and they also share the solution. So I was like, oh, so you're going to kind of a community resource. And so they agree, and we continue on. And I get a few more, responses like, oh, well, I'll contact you, Professor Sosulski. And I said, of course. And then what do I do? And they say, well, you actually like have a meeting with me, and we do a code walkthrough, and we talk it out. And then another student might say, well, I just contact the TA. We end up solving it over email, and I share various iterations of my code. And sometimes, I just kind of figure it out. Right? I figure it out because I realize I'm missing a semicolon or a period, or I misspelled something, which is usually the most common, right? And then one student will pop up and say, well, I use ChatGPT. And then the whole class starts laughing. And the whole class starts laughing because we've had this conversation about all these other resources that we use, but no one wanted to really share that they are using ChatGPT besides this brave soul that spoke up after like the 16th student, right? And it's a very funny moment, and I expect it, right? And then we start talking about how to evaluate the output. Where did it go wrong? Where has it helped you? Some people say, well, it just coded my program perfectly. Some other students said, I don't know what it did. It did something very complicated that I didn't understand. And I said, what did you do? I said, well, I asked it to explain it to me. And I said, that's very good. And here's a tip. You can also, if it provides you with something you don't understand, you can ask for explanations, and you can also ask it to document your code. And what that means is that in English words, document what's happening in the R programming language right above each code line. And that can be a way to help you learn and also advance your practice. So this is how I start introducing how to think about using generative AI, ChatGPT, whatever, as a kind of collaborator or as a tutor or another TF in your coding practice.
Kristen, I just want to thank you for taking the time to talk with us today. And I'm so excited to see how this conversation evolves throughout Stern.
I'm super excited too. Thanks so much, Kate. This was super fun.